Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 31st of March 2024. I have to rush through this. It's Easter Sunday, a weekend of, or a day today of family and food. And I do have to, I am being summoned already. Eek. I'm going to be in trouble. Anyway, we're going to the military aid and equipment video section. I'm splitting this off from Geopolitics that I'll do later. If the words of the French defense minister are not just a statement, then we are talking about over 1,000 VAB armored personnel carriers, 100 Leclerc tanks and dozens of fighter jets possibly heading for Ukraine. What's this talking about? Well, I mentioned yesterday that the French have declared that when they replace vehicles and equipment, military equipment, they're not going to ship them off to other parts of the world. It's all going to Ukraine, if indeed they want them. And this is huge because actually they're going through a 413 million euro replacement schedule from now until 2030. And so there will be, over time, a lot of equipment that will be, very much welcomed, I would have thought, by the Ukrainians if the French are going to send them that way. And it looks like they are putting their actions where their mouths have been recently. So the French are really coming to the fore. The rhetoric has been stepped up, and they're doing much, much more in terms of supporting Ukraine. France will deliver, says Nell Reports, hundreds of armoured vehicles and a new batch of Aster 30 missiles for the SAMP-T air defence. So that's equivalent to the Patriot, although we don't really know what the SAMP-T can do. There's a lot less data out there as far as its effectiveness against things like ballistic missiles. But the rumours are that it can do broadly what the Patriot does. Whether it does it as well, I don't know. Anyway, 30 more missiles for that, so that's going to be very useful for that system in Ukraine. Minister of the Armed Forces, Sebastien Lecornu, said, quote, "This old but operational equipment, such as a VAB, that's the armoured personnel carriers, of which they supposedly have hundreds on the way, will be able to directly benefit Ukraine in significant quantities. We can talk about hundreds of them for 2024 and early 2025. That's huge." So as French aid to Ukraine adds, hundreds of old but still functional armoured fighting vehicles and Aster missiles for the SAMP-T and the Mamba system, France will also release a new batch of Aster 30 missiles. So it's not just the 30 Aster missiles, but also older, possibly older missiles as well. I don't know. MBDA owes us quick deliveries. This Friday, decrees were published in terms of stock commitments, prioritization of contracts, and even requisitions. This is very interesting. So they are kicking the defense military industrial complex into a timely order and getting prioritization to happen. So Ukraine is a priority. Stock commitments, we want these stocks going to Ukraine. We want you to be making stuff for Ukraine and not for other countries, at least as a priority. And then requisitions. So the idea that I presume that means that the government can, make requisitions of private stockpiles or private facilities. I don't know. But certainly France is, as I say, coming to the fore. As French aid to Ukraine here says, the 300 short-range Mistral surface-to-air missiles that were to be delivered in early 2025 will now be delivered in the summer of 2024. So this is about prioritization, possibly requisitions. Instead of 2026, as originally planned, the 200 long-range Aster missiles will now be delivered in the second half of this year. So that's, I presume, on top of the 30 that have just been talked about. So really good news here for the French. Minister of Armed Forces, Sebastien Lecornu, called for delivery times to be sped up. This applies particularly to the most urgent sector, MBDA France's air defence missiles. The Aster 30 surface-to-air missiles is for both France and Ukraine. Brilliant stuff. Happy days. Thank you, France. Now, nothing is ruled out regarding deployment of French troops in Ukraine, says Yael Braun-Pivet, the president of the French National Assembly. And that was said in Odessa. She was asked to comment on President Macron's words. He says this is being considered, but she said she did not mention the deployment of troops, but confirmed that the option is being considered, which is brilliant. It's that the French are singing off the same song sheet here, and they are not going back on their word. They're not denying what the French president, Emmanuel Macron, has previously stated. So, quote, in his statement, the president said he doesn't rule anything out a priori. That means, before the evidence, straight away. In the position that France has demonstrated, is demonstrating and will demonstrate till the end of the year until victory itself. Victory there mentioned. This is great rhetoric. Nothing is ruled out. Everything remains possible. I won't give additional interpretations of the president's words. This position is quite clear, she said, as quoted by the Ukrainian TV channel. Fabulous stuff from the French in staying resolute there. Macron was right to keep Russia guessing about the limits of Western support when he floated the possibility of sending troops to Ukraine, according to Finland's foreign minister in the Financial Times. Quote, now's not the time to send boots on the ground, but for the long term, we shouldn't be ruling anything out. Again, we are having other nations coming to support France in their positioning of strategic ambiguity there and not putting limits on sending troops, not putting limits on what one can do to support Ukraine. This is really good. We need more international partners to do exactly what the Finnish foreign minister has done. Right, now going to Germany. Taurus manufacturer has announced the cessation of missile production due to lack of defence orders. There's been war for 2 years and Field Marshal Olaf Scholz has not ordered any more Taurus. Incredible, says Jürgen Naudit. Lots of people are going hard on this, right? I just want to add a little bit of a caveat in a second. So while France increases orders from missile manufacturers and demands faster deliveries, the Germans announced the interruption of the manufacture of Taurus missiles due to lack of orders. So, okay, that's bigging up the French while saying, what are you doing, Germany? Remember, Germany are doing lots of stuff with regard to consistent deliveries of and pledges of equipment, like massively significant. So after the US, it's Germany, right? And Germany are catching up to the US, with the US seeming to be stuck, paralyzed and unable to do anything due to the impasse in Congress. Now, Taurus is this, big ticket issue, isn't it? Fabian Hoffman here says it's a highly misleading tweet talking about what Jürgen Naudit said, and a highly misleading article to which it refers originally that the tweet is based on. Absolutely nothing has changed. Taurus has not been produced since 2020. The manufacturer has, however, stated that it is able to restart production once an order is placed. Okay, so be careful here. I know lots of people, all sorts of people shouting about Taurus not being made. It hasn't been made since 2020. It just needs an order. Now, we can go back to the issue is that there is not an order from Germany. So it's not a production scheduling issue and so on and so forth. This is just a problem that no one's ordering Taurus, and Ukraine could really do with them. I mean, it really could. Right, next actually referring to the built in Germany, that Ukraine has started receiving more ammunition for German Gepard surface-to-air, actually it's not surface-to-air missile systems. These are not missile systems, these are SPAGs, so surface self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, really. This is especially important now as Russia has intensified its shelling of Ukrainian infrastructure. For example, Russia attacked the Dnipro hydroelectric power plant and Zmivska, a power plant near Kharkiv, and the publication notes, quote, Gepard has been particularly good in the fight against Shaheeds, but their range is limited, and so they do not effectively fight against rockets. I mean, they can shoot them down, but obviously those rockets or those missiles need to be fairly close to the ground. They've got a sort of 5-kilometer range. Now, German aid to Ukraine puts a little bit more detail into this. After seeing the source of the tweet below, which is essentially from the Dead District, but it's referring to the same thing, it's just referring to the 300,000 rounds the German government has contracted over a year ago. No new contract for Ukraine is being given, is not even needed yet. In total, 300,000 rounds have been contracted with Rheinmetall, of which 40,000 rounds have been delivered so far. The production is ongoing in Toulouse in Germany. The deliveries will take place until around the end of 2025. The production can be seen below. Now, this is also providing, I mean, look at them. Those are sizable rounds, aren't they? My goodness. And no wonder they are that expensive as they fly out of that. What is it? $500 to $600 a piece. And these are also better munitions than the older style Gepard ammunition. So that's good news as well. Now, the Free State of Bavaria, to stay on Germany, has donated 11 BMW motorcycles to the Kiev Patrol Police. The motorcycles were handed over yesterday and will keep the Kiev Patrol Police to respond quickly to calls and allow them to be more manoeuvrable and mobile. Good stuff there from the Free State of Bavaria. On drones, not just drones, equipment in general. 80 plus samples of Ukrainian-made weapons have been received by the armed forces of Ukraine since the beginning of 2024. So just in 3 months, the Ukrainians have produced 80 different things and provided them to their own armed forces. According to Ivan Havrilyuk, the Deputy Minister of Defense, the largest group of ammunition of various types and calibers and many drones. Largest group is ammunition. So of the 80 plus different bits of kit that's been sent to the armed forces, ammunition, types of ammunition is the biggest group, and then drones, and then electronic warfare devices, and then robotic complexes. There are also completely new drones, both FPV kamikaze and multi-use short-range and long-range impact drones. So they're working hard to support their own armed forces. Right, we're just going to have a little bit of a sidebar here. So this is a British supplied Challenger 2 main battle tank in service with the Ukrainian 82nd Air Assault Brigade, moving near the front. Now, we haven't seen too many of these in action, primarily because they don't have too many of them. I mean, the British gave 14. I think we've seen one lost, have we? There was the rumour, and I was told directly that actually the UK provided possibly double the amount of the Challenger 2. They just didn't announce it. So you could have either 14 or 22 was a number I'd also heard, as well as 28. So I don't know, take your pick. We don't really know. You don't see them very much on the front line because that the attack down in the south in the Robotina area more precisely, but generally along the south, it's kind of stalled as the minefields and fortifications impeded the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And as a result, you didn't see the tanks, the main battle tanks provided by the West, used so widely. Also, there's been the problem that these are really heavy tanks, and as a result, they get stuck quite easily, especially this time of year with the Rasputitsa or the Bezhdorija, that mud that is such an issue for heavy tanks like this. So, and then you've got issues with can the bridges take the loads and so on and so forth. So, anyway, British main battle tank there. Now, let's just do a sidebar on the British combat power, because if we're talking about NATO in general, about how we can help supply Ukraine with stuff, and the fact that we aren't supplying them with much stuff at the moment compared to other nations because we've exhausted our stockpiles, because we've been underfunding our armed forces for an awful long time. You know, we need to understand that, because we also need to understand where the UK will be in terms of as a NATO, being a NATO power going forward in the next sort of decade or so. So Thomas Steiner has a useful critique of the UK here. During the Cold War, the British Army was the smallest of the 4 big European NATO armies. So that's the UK, France, Germany, Italy. The British Army fielded 13 brigades and the Royal Marines Commando Brigade, while Germany fielded, so we had 14 brigades, Germany fielded 38, and Italy 25 brigades. France fielded 12 divisions, which each had a strength of 2 times the standard NATO brigade, so that's about 24 brigades, effectively. But no one complained about the UK, because at the time, the Royal Air Force was the biggest air force on the continent, with some 800 plus fighters and bombers. Only France fielded a comparable air force. And the Royal Army, the Royal Navy was the second biggest. So I'm getting waved at by a baby here. And the Royal Navy was the second biggest navy in NATO. There's 3 people at the window just there, with more ocean-going ships than the French, German, and Italian navies combined. So we had a really big air force and a really big navy, and that allowed us to get away with having a very small army in comparison to the other 3 big nations in Europe. So the Royal Navy was the second biggest navy in NATO, with more ocean-going ships than the French, German, and Italian navies combined. Well, I come from a naval family. Both sides. My mum was a Wren, would now just be General Royal Navy, so Women's Royal Navy. And my dad was in the Navy. We lived around the world. I've seen the Royal Navy decrease in power, size, scope. Yeah, like one of my sisters was born in Mauritius because we had a naval base in Mauritius. No longer. I spent 3 years living in Hong Kong. We no longer, for political reasons and the fact that we leased it for 99 years, we gave that back in 1997. So we no longer have a base there. I lived in Gibraltar, and that's got smaller and smaller in terms of the number of personnel stationed there, so on and so forth. So our armed forces have been retracting, contracting. But after the Cold War, and especially under the Tory governments since 2010, says Thomas Tyner, the British armed forces have been wrecked. Interestingly, he levels it mainly at the Tories. Today, the British Army has fallen further behind France, Italy, and Germany, and even fallen behind Poland, Turkey, Greece, and Spain in combat power. Meanwhile, the Royal Air Force has fallen to 8th place of air forces in Europe, and the Royal Navy is now on par with the Italian and French navies. In short, the British contribution to NATO has fallen off a cliff, and so has the British influence in NATO. The UK needs to grow defence spending to 3% of GDP if the UK wants to bring RAF, Army and Royal Navy back to be an acceptable and capable strength. More submarines and frigates for the Royal Navy, more Typhoons and F-35A for the Royal Air Force, new tanks, new IFVs, new self-propelled artillery, and lots of air defence, including Patriot for the British Army. Stop dithering and rebuild the British Armed Forces ASAP. An interesting critique there, and not really wrong. We are under strength compared to what we were. I mean, our naval heritage, goodness me, and living where I do in a very naval part of the world. It used to be when I'd go around my local towns. I live very near, and in fact, most of my working life has been spent in a place called Gosport. It used to be full of matlows, so sailors everywhere. Like I was born and brought up in a before I went abroad in a small town called Lyon-Solent. Had a naval air base there. It's now no longer a naval air base. So all of these old married quarters have become like council flats and so on and so forth, and it's just a sign of fewer and fewer people being in the armed forces. So then when we get to this position of Russia being the threat it is, and this kind of looming spectre of World War III, like, do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the people that want to go and join the armed forces? What's it looking like for the UK going forward? And then we can wonder about the rest of Europe. So although we've receded behind these other nations in terms of the size and power of our armed forces, how are they doing? I mean, I know Poland is kind of bucking the trend. What's it looking like in the other nations like France and like Germany in terms of their equipment stockpiles and their ability to recruit? Let me know in the thread below. I think this is a challenge. I'm not advocating every nation becomes a military nation, but I am also incredibly worried about what's going on in Ukraine and with Russia, and I'm worried about China and Taiwan. And so, what are we doing to make sure that we're in the right place geopolitically going forward? Because let's look what Russia are doing. Russia, more meat being prepared by Putin this Easter. Says Tim White, 150,000 more call-ups from Putin's decree orders today. This consignment is likely to replace those currently behind the lines who will be shoved to perish ingloriously on the front line. So it's interesting that there's this decree for 150,000 new recruits. And they've moved the conscription age up from 27 to 30, which is, I think, so that 18 to 30 is now, Club 1830 is looking very different in Russia, I can tell you. So that decree has been signed. This is what we expected after the elections. And it's happening. So it's not the 300,000, it's not 500,000 or whatever, it is 150,000. So that's obviously what Putin thinks he can get away with without having too much of a public reaction to this. Whether he will do that and have a crypto mobilization going on under the radar as well. So continuing to take in foreign, migrants, people from abroad, and try and either crypto or klepto mobilize those people. I don't know. I presume that will continue happening. We have got this idea that they are at present where are we? I'm sure. No. So the British intelligence have said that they are presently. I'm going to go and find that actually. Yeah, here it is. So. Russia is reportedly recruiting about 30,000 military personnel every month to participate in the war, and this is something we've known. That number's been fairly consistently touted, this rapid mobilization pace enables Russia to sustain heavy losses while continuing attacks that deplete the armed forces of Ukraine. So the question is, will that still keep going on, and 150,000 is on top of that? And that will be a real challenge. Obviously, it's all going to be a challenge for the Ukrainians. Just recruiting 30,000 a month is a challenge because they're able to sustain their grinding attacks going and moving to the west, the Russians. Now, with an extra 150,000, that's going to be a huge issue, and Ukraine will have to mobilize themselves. Now, the question is, will the Russian 150,000 mobilized recruits have the training and equipment to make a significant difference? And of course, you can still give them we talked about this like a year and a half ago when they last had their big mobilization pushes. Will it matter that much that they won't have great training and equipment? You just put the boots on the ground and you just send them forward in these meat assaults, and you end up grinding forward and taking this territory regardless of the huge human cost to your own population, really. This is definitely going to be a challenge for the Ukrainians. What are they going to do to mitigate against this? And of course, then it's going to be incumbent upon Western nations to help to mitigate this with provision of equipment that allows the Ukraine. Because really, like I've said before, the Ukrainians can win this war if we just give them enough stuff. But the stuff we want to concentrate on is the distance munitions. So the Ukrainians want to be able to take out these troops without going mano a mano, hand-to-hand firing in trenches. That will be attritional, just as attritional for the Ukrainians as it is for the Russians. You need to send just countless HIMARS missiles and ATACMS and Storm Shadows and Taurus and into the Russian logistics and troop accumulations and whatever, so that you're taking out these troops without losing your own troops. It's really important that we continue to do that. It's going to be interesting to see the effect this has on the popular discourse, in the public discourse, in Russia, and what effect this will have on morale and support for the government. 150,000 isn't a 300,000, but it's still going to hurt. It is starting to happen. This is getting serious, even more serious. Russia aims to form mobile fire groups to counter recently intensified strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, equip these groups with thermal imagers, electronic warfare systems and machine guns. However, ISW said that Russia is unable to field these groups at the required scale, and whether some of these troops are going to be going into units behind the line that do stuff like that. As well, we have the Russian Air Force wanting to refurbish and upgrade an AN-124 after 24 years of long-term storage. So if they're bringing out a plane, an airframe that's been stored for 24 years, what does that say about how desperate they are? And the other thing to say about the recruitment of troops is this: if that's 150,000 troops that they are recruiting, and they previously recruited 300,000 back in whenever it was. This is an admission that they've pretty much lost 150,000 people injured and killed. This says that the Ukrainians are doing a really significant job of attriting the Russian troops, such that they need to mobilize that many people. An experimental exercise of the Russian UGVs in the Badichi direction. Now, I can't talk to what is going on here and the accuracy of this claim. However, we are looking at seemingly a picture of 5 unmanned ground vehicles being used in unison against the Ukrainians here somewhere near Badichi. Possibly. I don't know for sure, but that is an interesting development. I don't know how worrying that is. Anyway, that's enough for me. Really appreciate your support. I'm going to go and do one for the best part of the rest of the day, and I'll hit you with the geopolitical and mapping update. JR thinks already done the mapping. Goodness me, he's up bright and breezy today. I'm a little bit behind. Do apologise. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.